of the Arctic tundra where it was born. But as you go around looking at trees, virtually every tree that you'll see within a few miles of this spot will have been planted. There are a few species that are escaping from plantings, like the ailanthus tree, escaping from plantings and growing wild in vacant lots, and a few parts of Central Park that have more or less natural native vegetation. But most of the trees that you'll see around here are cultivated. And that's not to diminish the trees, but I think it challenges our assumption of what's natural, and it really blurs the line between the natural world and the human world in ways that bird study doesn't. Now, I think that I think any kind of nature study is sort of a well, I like to make the comparison of going to say you're going to a cocktail party in Prague. You don't know anyone, and you walk into the room, and as you wander around and mingle and learn to know a few names, you get more comfortable, and you start to make connections, and you find out that you actually have things in common with some of the people, and you make friends, and you make plans to do some things. And I think the field guide is sort of your introduction to the cocktail party of nature. That you wander around, you mingle a little, you ask a few questions, you learn some names, you make some friends, and you connect. You find things that you have in common. You learn a little bit about their world, the rhythms of sunrise and sunset, and the cycles of the seasons, the things that the birds and the trees are responding to. And that's the real connection to nature, is almost connecting to the parts of ourselves that are natural, the things that we can still appreciate and still have within us that are parts of nature. And I think that's underlying the real pleasure of nature study and the real goal of the field guide and this whole hobby of just getting out there and naming things. So, thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yeah, in the way back. I think there's a microphone coming.
Hi. I had a question. It's a little bit specific. I was looking at the bibliography, and I was wondering, what source did you use for the absolute final taxonomy of the plants? I mean, I'm always struggling with figuring out what the most current plant names are and the scientific names, and I saw you put one thing that always confuses me. Sorry, this is a little bit nerdy, but like the legume family, sometimes they call it Leguminosae and sometimes they call it Fabaceae.
Yeah.
What was your authority for that?
I combined a lot of different sources, but really, what were there's the USDA keeps a database of plants, so I used that, and there's a project called BONAP, the Biota of North America program, that's online. If you just Google BONAP, you'll find it. And the guy who's put all that together, John Cartez, has done a lot of work on that. So as far as species taxonomy and species names, those were two of my main sources. Then there's a Flora of North America project that's a big project involving hundreds of botanists. But it's incomplete so far. So for the groups that they've done, I used their taxonomy. And there's another kind of informal working group called the Angiosperm Phylogeny Group. Now, talk about nerdy. Yeah, and that's what I used for most of the higher level families, family names, and family taxonomy. So, but it was, as you sort of alluded to, it was extremely difficult, and there were big changes. I was making big changes right up till the end of the process of putting the book together, kind of regrouping things into different families and making those decisions. So it's still in flux. That kind of brings up another thing about plants in general. They don't. When you look at a bird, if it has some bright colors or makes a certain sound or a certain display, you know that that's meant to communicate with other birds, which is going to separate that species from other species. So the things that we see and hear and use to identify the birds are the same things that they use to distinguish each other from other species. And that's not true in plants. They don't see each other. They don't hear each other. So the main senses that we use to experience trees are things that are meaningless taxonomically. So a lot of this new taxonomy is coming from DNA studies, where they're discovering relationships that just aren't obvious in the way the trees look. So I'm sure there will be more coming.
You're the perfect person to ask this question, combining the two things between the birds and the trees. I know when I go out with my grandchildren, are there trees that attract more birds than others, and are there trees that never attract birds?
There are trees that attract more birds than others, and there are certain species of birds that are associated with, mostly with broad types of trees. If you go out in Central Park in the spring, when the oak trees are just leafing out, I think someone's done a study and found that oaks have the greatest diversity of insects that are associated with them, that feed on their leaves. So as soon as the oaks start to leaf out, the migrating warblers in the spring gravitate toward the oak trees. The trees with the fewest insects, and therefore the fewest birds, tend to be some of the exotic cultivated species, like ginkgo, which, and that's one of the reasons those species are cultivated, is because there aren't any native insects that feed on them. So they're pretty reliable. They'll have nice green leaves all summer. They won't get eaten by caterpillars. They won't harbor a lot of insect pests. It's good for your landscape, but for looking at your yard, but it's not so good for the native birds. So the native trees in general will attract a lot more birds than any exotic cultivated species.
Hi. I just want to say your paintings are really beautiful.
Thanks.
That being said, how large do you make the paintings, like of a leaf?
I made, all the paintings in the bird guide and in the tree guide. The original paintings that became a page in the book were about 15 by 20 inches. So they're, in the bird guide, about 3 times as big as what's printed. In the tree guide, the sheets of paper I was working on were about 15 by 20 inches. But a lot of the sizes got changed. I found, just for simplicity, as I was working through all the paintings, I painted all the leaves and fruit life-size. So, except for a few species, like big leaf magnolia that has leaves 2 feet long or more, or ailanthus, where the leaves are 2 or 3 feet long. But in general, I painted the leaves life-size. And I always find that I'm much more comfortable working at a large size and working with a bigger brush than if I don't have to be so careful about how the brush goes. I can be fairly loose, and